and welcome back to the R video training series. Today's video focuses on graphing vectorsurvR data using ggplot 2. Make sure you have the following packages installed and loaded on your device. You need to be running at least version 1.51 for this training. This guide focuses on the ggplot2 package and the many versatile ways you can graph and map your data. I will be using the sample data found in the vectorsurvR package, but feel free to use your own agency's data for this training. ggplots build on themselves. If we look at the documentation, we can see that a ggplot requires data and mapping. The mapping is going to take a graphing component and tie it directly to a data column. If we run a blank ggplot function, we will get this empty plot. And if we were to run a ggplot with a mapping, the square will become filled with our data on each axis in accordance to how we have mapped it. To display our data, we must draw a geom component on our graph. To do that, we have to use this plus sign operator, and then we can add a geom. Notice that there are many different geoms. We will be using the geom point. Geom layers inherit the data and aesthetics mapping from the original ggplot function. They do not inherit from one another, and so if we were to add another geom layer, say geom line, it will map in accordance to the original ggplot mapping. But if we were to take this mapping out and add it to our geom point and then run the function, geom line will not inherit from gg point. It will only take from the parent layer. This also means we can map different graphing layers to different parts of our data, and sometimes have different data. We can simplify our graph by filtering the data and then redrawing it. We can look at our geom layer. Scroll down on the documentation and see that there are two required aesthetics, the X and the Y, for this type of graph. And there are several optional ones as well. So we can add these optional ones into our graph. Here I map color to species display name and shape to our trap acronym. Also, for each aesthetic, we can name our aesthetics with the labels function, which is this labs function here. And we can also add a title. This is the output. It's very busy because there's a lot of different species in this data, but you can see that each species is mapped to a color and each trap is mapped to a shape. We can apply this to our abundance calculation. We can create a line plot for abundance with bi-week on our x-axis and abundance on our y-axis. I add the point and the line layers and get this sort of graph. We can also create a bar chart. We can separate our abundance by species, and then we can create the same line and bar charts shown above. However, now I have assigned color to species on the line chart and fill to species on the bar chart. We use color for the line plot because color refers to the color of a one-dimensional lines and points. And then we use fill for the bar chart to specify we want the rectangles of the bars to be filled. By default, our bar chart stacks data when it is mapped to a fill or a color. We can tell it to reposition our bars by using the position equals dodge parameter. This will place each species on its own independent column. We can filter out species accordingly and then redo this graph and get a more simplified or streamlined graph. We can compare this further by splitting up our species onto their own independent graphs. We can use the faucet wrap function in the ggplot library. Look at faucet wrap. We can see that there are several parameters and run this function. We can see that the species are each on their own independent graph. We can customize this ribbon by changing the number of columns and rows we want to be displayed. The default scales are fixed to be the same for each of the graphs. We can specify that we want different scales to be free, or both scales, or we can do this for either or, depending on how we wanted to display our data. Now, this is where I'm going to end this video today. Most of the following functions are different layers and components for the basics of creating ggplots. The following video is going to focus more on styling. So that refers to things such as changing the tick marks on these graphs so that they look differently, customizing legends and customizing themes, as well as more advanced graphing methods. As always, I hope this was helpful and hope to see you next time.